On today's episode, we get to talk about the implications of Jesper Fast not being on the roster next season. Also get to talk about the NHL Network's top 20 defenseman list and how another Carolina Hurricane did not make the top 10. And that goes into the last segment of, is Jaccob Slavin a top 10 defenseman in the NHL?
Your Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everydayer for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed beat writer for the Carolina Hurricanes over at the Hockey Writers. Also do a weekly column on the Chicago Wolves called Wolves Weekly. I am a co-host of the Surgecast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all of my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. Got a very special guest with me today. He did cover the Canes for a little bit before I started at THW, but now he's the main guy for the Ottawa Senators. Really excited to have this guy on. He's been in my corner since I basically started my writing journey with the Hockey Writers. I'm very excited to have Jacob Billington on the podcast today. Jacob, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. That was a fantastic intro, and I'm happy to be here. I love the Hurricanes. I love what they've done, and so yeah, happy to talk about them anytime.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and I will say this, putting on record that my Canadian team is the Ottawa Senators, so there's mutual respect on both sides here, and all that good stuff. But today's episode, like I said at the start, we are going to talk about Jesper Fast and the news of him being out for the season. Also talk about the NHL Network's top 20 defenseman list and why I at least believe that Jaccob Slavin should be a top 10 defenseman in the NHL. But I'm curious to see what Jacob's thoughts are on that. But before we get into everything for today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download it. Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. So I would say not even like an hour before we jumped on, we got the news from the Carolina Hurricanes official account. And then, of course, it was also tweeted out by Walt Ruff that Jesper Fast is going to miss the 24-25 season after getting neck surgery earlier this month. Of course, he got hurt in the last game of the regular season against the Columbus Blue Jackets, did miss the playoffs, wasn't a neck brace. Over the summer, there was some photos of him, circulating around from Sebastian Aho's wedding in Finland. Dim neck brace on. Everyone thought that maybe that was a good step in the right direction. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And Jacob, what are your thoughts on just that? I wouldn't say it's a massive bombshell, but it definitely brings some implications to the lineup so close to basically training campus next month for the Hurricanes.
I would kind of argue with that and say it is a massive bombshell because it has so many implications. He was one of the best analytical players with possession last season for the Hurricanes. Mm-hmm. They certainly missed him in the playoffs, and while they do have a deep forward group, they really missed him. And so missing him for an entire year, that's not – and like players like him aren't available right now. Teams want those players. Even there's some that you could look at and say, they might be available at the deadline because that's when they're going to fetch the biggest return. But that's so far down the road. So that's a big hole in the lineup. And while he, on paper, is pretty replaceable, he played a really big role in the possession game.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It's like I said, it's one of those things where it's like you don't want to overplay how important he was, but he really was important. You definitely saw that in the playoffs too, because I mean, for the most part, the team did score, but even then, there are some times where you're like, you really want some scoring, and Jesper Fast did bring that too. But yeah, like you said, it's some big implications of just analytically, he was really good. Definitely in possession, of course, we're talking like Corsi and all of the nerd analytical stuff that a lot of us are like, okay, how can we look at these numbers and correlate what's going to happen with these guys? But yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting for sure. I mean, they bring in Eric Robinson, they brought in Tyson Jost, William Carrier, Jack Roslovic. Like, it's kind of, we know for sure that's probably going to be the Jordans and Jordan Martinook and Jordan Stahl on the third line. As of right now, of course, the top six still has a spot open, but like, let's say the Jordans are still together. Would you say the Hurricanes might go for someone else in free agency, or do you kind of see them looking at like a Robinson, Roslovic, maybe Carrier? I know Brendan Lemieux is also on the roster. He came back for a one-year contract as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't hate any of them for options on the fourth line, but on the third line and the on that line with Martinook and Stahl, I think you'd really like to see I can't even think of a player that might be available off the top of my head. Before we started recording, you mentioned James Van Riemsdyk.
Yep.
I think that he would be a good fit on the roster, but on that third line, I just don't think he's a strong enough defensive presence, which is something that those three really thrived in last season and the couple seasons before as well. So I think that they should look elsewhere for help there. Jack Roslovic could be a good fit there. I'd like to see them give him a shot. He could even get a shot in the top six if they don't think Bradley Nadeau is quite ready, or if Seth Jarvis goes unsigned into the season. Roslovic is a pretty versatile player, so I could see him getting a shot there and being a good complementary piece. But if they put Jesper Fast on LTIR, they're going to have a little bit of space to work with, even with Seth Jarvis unsigned.
Yeah, because I know we talked about it before. I know we were looking at possibly like $9.6 million. It could go up to $12 million, depending on, because the fact that you get that flexibility of Foss's 2.4 being on LTIR. So, and like you mentioned, guys who might be available. Looking at them right now, they're just UFAs. You're looking at James Van Riemsdyk. He made $1 million last year. He probably has the best points out of the guys that are available. They do have Joe Pavelski, but we all know he retired. So right now, Van Riemsdyk has the most points at 38. He was also 0.53 point per game guy last year, but I don't know. You're looking at Mike Hoffman, Blake Wheeler, Jacob Silverberg, Cal Clutterbuck. Yeah, I mean, Kyle Yamamoto. Those are a lot of mainly your right wingers. Yeah, Dominic Kubalik. It's just, it's when you start going a little bit farther down the list, like there's not a lot of guys, honestly, that kind of like jumps off the page at you.
I do think Yamamoto could be a really good fit. I really like Yamamoto's play, and I loved him as a prospect. I was surprised he fell to, I think he went 28th overall.
Yeah.
I was very surprised that he fell that far. And so he has a lot of potential in his game. I don't know if he still can reach that in the NHL after a couple failed experiments with Edmonton and Seattle. But I wouldn't mind seeing Yamamoto come in.
I wouldn't mind either. I honestly wouldn't mind either, probably Silverberg or maybe Blake Wheeler. Blake Wheeler is 37, but Silverberg is 33. Not a terrible.
Silverberg announced his retirement.
Oh, did he? Well, there you go then. I didn't even know he retired. No one. Puckpedia, come on, you got to update your list. So, well, there you go then. So, I mean, it's just, it's like you said, I think Yamamoto is probably the best option. Van Riemsdyk, like you said, it's a kind of a question mark on his defense. I know a lot of us have been kind of thinking probably Roslovic there just because he does have he does have a physical presence to him, but defensively, is he good for I don't know. Like I said, I could see Robinson there too, but it's definitely going to be very interesting to see how the Hurricanes kind of play into that, and especially too with like a lot of the prospects like Jackson Blake. Does he come up? Does Phil Understorm come up? And then even then, it's like you have a lot of these guys who are just coming from college or Understorm's coming from the SHL. That's a big ask to be like, all right, welcome to pro hockey for your first full season and third right wing with the Jordans, and you're like on one of the most shut down lines in the NHL, which is a tall ask, honestly.
Yeah, I do think, like you mentioned with Roslovic, I think physicality should be an important part of kind of the audition for that role, whoever's going into it. A couple of trade targets that I look around the league and see, like I wonder if they would be interested in Jordan Greenway.
I can see that.
Make all three Jordans on the third line. He plays the physical game. He's not as strong defensively, but on a line with Martinook and Stahl, you don't really need to be the strongest defensive player to really do well with them.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, you look at what last season for most parts you had Seth Jarvis there, and he was the scorer basically. He reignited that entire line to go absolutely off. So yeah, I mean, they've thrown pretty much like they've had Niederreiter there at some points. Like I said, Jordan Martinook just got there recently. Jesper Fast has been there for the last 3-4 seasons. He's been just that guy on the right wing. So yeah, it's because we thought he always been gone for a little bit to come back. Now it's what's next for like how are they going to work that out? Like I said, there's question marks on the top six. I don't know. The Hurricanes are going to be in a very interesting spot, that's for sure. But obviously, we're going to wish nothing but safe recovery for Jesper Fast. Hopefully, it's not too terrible, and hopefully he gets back to hockey soon. I know this was the last year of his contract with the Hurricanes, so I'm maybe hoping he comes back next year and has a redemption, and I guess we'll go from there. But definitely got to wish him nothing but the best. So now we're going to move on to the top 20 defenseman list from the NHL Network. But make sure to stay tuned because we have some thoughts on how that list definitely come out. So make sure to stay right here for a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. You've heard of us talking about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you for making Locked On Hurricanes your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. At the end of segment 1, we kind of teased a little bit about how the national, the NHL Network decided to drop their top 20 defenseman list. And Jacob, I know when this came out on Wednesday night, a lot of people had some interesting opinions on this top 20 list, to say the least.
Yeah, there's some good parts to the list until you get to like number 4. And then the rest of the list is actually, honestly, even when you get to number 3, everything starts to get pretty questionable.
Yeah, it pretty much does. And it makes you kind of wonder how it's like, I'm not really quite sure how this list works out. And the name that kind of just like took a lot of people by surprise was the fact that you look at where, you have Morris Seider at 20, Dougie Hamilton at 19. And I like Dougie, but didn't really play very much or anything last year. Noah Hanifin at 18, Drew Doughty at 17. Then you have Matthias Ekholm from Edmonton, Noah Dobson, Zach Werenski, Jaccob Slavin at 13. Make sure to keep that one kind of penciled in there. Josh Morrissey at 12. Then you had Rasmus Dahlin coming at 11. And then you crack your top 10. Devin Tays, Evan Bouchard, Adam Fox at 8, Charlie McAvoy, Gustav Forsling, who just won the Stanley Cup with the Panthers. And then you got Mira Heiskanen, Roman Josi, Victor Hedman at 3, Quinn Hughes, and Cal McCarr. Jacob, just looking at this list, like just real quick before, just like what kind of stood out to you the most at first glance on this list?
Well, 1/4 of that list has something in common. Do you know what it is? 5 of those 20 players. Do you know what it is?
What's that?
They either were or are Carolina Hurricanes. 5 players on that list.
Yeah.
So you got Gustav Forsling. That was, you don't blame them for moving him.
No.
Adam Fox.
Well,
Jaccob Slavin.
Yeah.
And then you got Hanifin and Hamilton as well.
Yeah, the Adam Fox thing. I mean, he did that with he did with another team before he came to Carolina. Have fun in New York. I mean, at that time with Gustav Forsling, it's like, what can you really do at that point? And
right.
I've heard a lot of people say that that's probably one of the most underrated like waiver claims because, yeah, he got really good. And do the Hurricanes wish they kept him? Yes, but also hindsight 2020. No one thought he was going to be that good. So, hey, you know what? It happens to the best of us. But yeah. But so you initially said the top 4 is very interesting. What about the top 4 makes you kind of like scratch your head a little bit on that one?
Well, I think McCarr and Hughes 1 and 2. If anybody has something else than that, they just didn't watch enough hockey last year. And then when you
there's no debate there. Yeah,
no debate not at all. When you get to Victor Hedman at 3, I think he's more like a 6-7 at this point in his career. He's not as good defensively, and he has a ton of offensive weapons to pass the puck to rack up those points. I don't think he's the third best defenseman. And then number 4, Roman Josi, he should be in the 3 spot.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. Hedman is, I think it's a lot of, Victor Hedman is Victor Hedman. Let's just throw him into the top 10. It's like, okay, you can, but 3, though, is a little bit of a stretch, especially how Tampa played last year. And like you said, it's a bunch of offensive guys. Like, hey, it doesn't help when you have Nikita Kucherov finishing in the top, 3 in points with over 120 something. But yeah, I mean, even then, like Evan Bouchard kind of came on the scene last season, especially during the playoffs. So I think that's kind of for me, that's kind of a stretch for the fact that you just knew about this guy last year. Like, does he really deserve a top 10 spot? Devin Taves, I think he's a really good defensive defenseman for the Colorado Avalanche, and I know we're on a Hurricanes podcast, and a lot of people are going to be like, this is a homer opinion, but for me, Jaccob Slavin is a top 10 pick. I'm sorry, 13. Last years, he was at 14. And somehow the guy who won the Lady Byng for a second time, the only other defenseman to win it multiple times was Red Kelly, and he did it with the Red Wings and the Toronto Maple Leafs way back when it was still 6 teams in the league. But Jaccob Slavin, he won the Lady Byng for the second time. He should have won it 3 times in a row, but that's a whole different conversation. And he should have a Norris at this point, but also another conversation for another time, because we can be here for another 2 hours discussing how the Norris is whatever it is now. But I don't know. It's like, what are your thoughts when you kind of look at like a Evan Bouchard, Devin Taves, kind of where they're at and where they kind of view Jaccob Slavin?
Well, I'm definitely taking Slavin over Devon Taves. If I look at the list, so already mentioned Makar, Hughes, and Josi 1, 2, and 3. And then I would have Heiskanen at 4.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
Or I might have Adam Fox at 4. 4 and 5 are Heiskanen and Fox.
Mm-hmm.
6, I think I do go Evan Bouchard. And then 7 is either Hedman or Slavin. But I don't think Slavin falls any further than 8.
No, I would definitely say 8 is probably his best spot. I mean, I can see why a lot of people like Bouchard. For me, it's okay, you had a really good season, but does that qualify a top 10? I guess it depends on how you feel about it. And yeah, Adam Fox, I mean, he did all right. Charlie McAvoy, that's kind of like, that's an interesting one for me too. It's like, Charlie McAvoy did okay, but it's like, is that because of what he's done in the past, or is it because he actually did really well last season and kind of put himself into number 7?
I think Charlie McAvoy, he is a very, very good defenseman, but I think he's one of, the second most overrated defenseman on this list, especially in the top 10.
Yeah, him and Hedman. Yeah, I'd say that about 3 or 4 years ago when you're talking about McAvoy and Hedman kind of being
him and Forsling.
Ooh, okay.
Kristoff Forsling comes in at 6. I think that they're both very overrated.
Yeah, I think Forsling did really well, but yeah, like just like the same thing for Evan Bouchard. Like, does one playoff run consider you that high on a list?
Yeah.
I don't know, because you look at guys like Jaccob Slavin. He's someone who's, I think, most of his career has either had 8 penalty minutes or less. I mean, heck, he was 1 delay of game penalty away from having 0 in a season. Could it be a 3-time lead being winner? Could have a Norris, but like I said, that's a whole different conversation. But then for me, it's like it's interesting how they have Drew Doughty at 17, one ahead of Noah Hannafin. Noah Hannafin was okay for Calgary, and now because he's now in Vegas, it's like, oh yeah, E-team. What?
There's a few names missing on this list. I honestly think that Brock Faber and Jake Sanderson should be on there ahead of Doughty and Hannafin at this time in their careers.
I would definitely say those two for sure. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and I do like the appreciation for Zach Werenski. I think he's very underappreciated across the league. Same for Noah Dobson.
Yeah. Seeing how good Noah Dobson's been, especially in the Metro, and especially how he was in the playoffs too. My goodness, he was someone that you really had to worry about in the playoffs. Freddie Anderson had to make some huge saves against him in the first round against the Islanders for sure. And yeah, Zach Werenski, man, like I really enjoy him. Being an Ohio guy, really, kind of a soft spot for the Jackets, and just watching Zach play, he's really good. It's just the injuries. He cannot catch a break when staying healthy. But if he is healthy, though, yeah, you see him kind of pushing that 12, 13 spot. But honestly, 14, not bad at all. And same thing for Dobson, too. So it's kind of good to see the Metro is somewhat getting some recognition for how good their defense is. Maurice Sider, I'm not upset with him being at 20. I think it'd be a little bit higher than 20, especially with the fact of how Doughty, Hannafin, and even Dougie. Like Dougie Hamilton didn't really do much last year for the Devils because he was hurt for a good majority of it too. So it's like, do you kind of think that those like 17, 18, 19 is a kind of a lot of nostalgia, or more of like, oh, we got to give respect to these guys type picks?
I think that's exactly what it is. But with Hamilton, so he played 26 games last year. In those first 26 games of the season, he was in the conversation for the Norris. Right. I think he was at 19 points in 26 games. And he was doing fantastic. So, but like you said, he needs to show that over a full season.
Yeah. But Matthias Ekholm, how do you feel about him at 16, and even like Josh Morrissey at 12? Just seeing the Central Western Canadians kind of being on part of this list.
I like Josh Morrissey at 12. He's a really good shutdown guy, but also over the past 2 seasons has blown up offensively, and he's done fantastic. And for Matthias Ekholm, I think that now that he's in a bigger spotlight than Nashville, people are seeing just how effective he is. He blocks a ton of shots, throws a ton of hits. He had a lot of points, which is going to happen when you play on Edmonton. Right. But he solidified that blue line, and he's exactly what everybody hoped Oscar Klefbom would turn into.
Right.
But he's actually here now and playing in the role and doing exactly what's expected of him.
Yeah, not a bad pickup for the Oilers, especially to get him out of Nashville. And then the last guy we haven't really talked about yet, Rasmus Dahlin at 11. For the Buffalo Sabres and all their struggles, they do have a really good young defensive core, and obviously Dahlin has kind of been like that heart and soul of the defense ever since he kind of came in the league. Like, how do you feel about him being at 11? Or do you think he should be kind of like Slavin, kind of sneaking into that top 10?
I think 11's a good spot for him. I think if he was a little bit less streaky offensively, he could move into the top 10. His defense is good, not great. Right. I like what he brings, and that's not a terrible thing when you're as good offensively as he is. And that was always part of his game since he was a prospect. But yeah, no, I like Dahlin in that 11 spot.
This is always something that comes into a conversation. I want to get your thoughts on this. It's when you see like a list like this, or you look at Norris votes and everything else. Like, do you kind of feel like how media is kind of viewing defensemen now? It's, oh, you got to have like strong offensive output to be considered top 10 in the league. When you have like really good defensemen like Jaccob Slavin, and of course we talked about with Devin Tays and Morrissey and all of them, the guys who were mainly known for defense. Like, do you kind of feel like that the more of the defensive defensemen kind of get overlooked now in this more offensive? Oh, we love these defensemen because they're offensively minded, and they should have all the Norris votes and top 10s and all that. Like, what are your thoughts on how defense is kind of looked at as more of an offensive component rather than what necessarily was starting out as being a shutdown guy in your own zone?
I believe that the Norris Trophy right now is 95% the Art Ross for defensemen. That's pretty much what it is. Whoever gets the most points is going to win. But I do think that media and the league and everything surrounding it is getting so much better at recognizing the defensive defenseman. It's just been impossible to really measure until the last, let's say, 5 years publicly, because of the analytics that are available now. Like, you look at right before we started recording, we were talking about AFP analytics. They've been doing fantastic. The J Fresh cards by Patrick Bacon.
So great. Great.
And like, it seems like everybody is starting to develop their own kind of models, and not everybody, but a lot of brilliant minds.
Yeah.
And it's really good because you can see the common trends between them. Not everyone is going to be the same. Some might say Josh Morrissey is a much better defenseman than Charlie McAvoy because of this, this, and this. And the other one will refute that. But you can look at both charts, both models, and all the stats and say, okay, well, they're both saying that this defenseman is really good offensively, but he's also one of the best defensively. So being able to have a diverse kind of library of the models that you look at and how you measure how impactful a defenseman can be, the NHL and the media have never had more of a luxury.
Yeah, that's very true. They really do. And I've had conversations with a bunch of people of like, okay, at this point, maybe we should just have all right, we're making the Norris what it should have been, a defensive defenseman award, and then maybe have a offensive one where it's a Paul Coffey or a Bobby Orr, or name some really good offensive defenseman and make it that award. Like,
what would you name the defensive award?
That's a good question. I mean, Nick Lindstrom. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of good names, honestly, you can kind of look at and be like, okay, who's your? I mean, I don't know who would you kind of name the award after?
The Jaccob Slavin Award. Come on,
he's still playing. He's still playing. You can't do that yet. Come on, take me. You can't do it that soon. Can't do it that soon. I see what you did there. 1 seed Jacob, talking about the double seed Jacob. I mean, hey, they say the second C stands for clutch, and he really is. It's just
and captain. He might not wear the C, but he is a captain on that team.
Oh, definitely, for sure. And you know what? That is a great segment because we are going to talk about Jaccob Slavin and why I at least believe he should be in the top 10 and everything that he's done for the Hurricanes and so much more. So make sure to stay tuned right here as we get to talk about that and everything about Jaccob Slavin here on a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. All right, guys, we got to talk about Gametime. And Gametime, it has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes game tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching throughout thousands of tickets. And also, too, for Labor Day, there is a Gametime 50% off offer for Labor Day when you go to the Diamondbacks and the Dodgers. 50% off tickets at the Dodgers at Diamondbacks game on Labor Day, exclusively on Gametime. There is limited availability and supply, so get your tickets while they last on this Labor Day special. Stay away from starting at X dollars or as low as that doesn't work with the promotion, where the deals will be scattered throughout the venue for 50% off. Now, talk about the Gametime app itself. The one thing I really like about it is their viewfinder from your seats. Those are absolutely amazing. But even more so with the Gametime picks too, before that, the curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedies, and so much more. And like I said, with that seat finder, it's a panoramic view from your seat in the app, so that way you can check out where you're going to be looking at before you buy. So no obstructive views, awkward angles, and stuff like that. They take all that guesswork out for you. So like I said, taking out the guesswork, well, you can take it out by buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL. That's LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So at the end of segment 2, we kind of teased about how we're going to talk about Jaccob Slavin and why I at least think he should be a top 10 defenseman in the NHL. But of course, in segment 2, we all know what Jacob's thoughts were on why the double C Jacob should be in the top 10. And I mean, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but I kind of want to get your full opinions on just how important Jaccob Slavin is to the Hurricanes and why he is still being really considered an underrated defenseman in the NHL.
Well, I'll start with a little actually self-promotion here. So at thehockeywriters.com, I just released the top 100 players in the NHL for this upcoming season.
It's a must-read. I would highly recommend go reading it. Chef's kiss, amazing. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you very much. There was 10,000 head-to-head votes amongst the writers, over 10,000 words of content in there. And so I just kind of started going through and looking at where the defensemen ranked. So Jaccob Slavin finished 8th on the list for the top 100, or he finished 36th on the list, the 8th defenseman on the list. So he was number 8. Evan Bouchard was number 7. Charlie McAvoy was number 6. Adam Fox was number 5, Roman Josi number 4, Victor Hedman number 3.
Yeah.
Quinn Hughes 2 and Makar 1. So
for the most part, the top 7 was kind of like outside of Gustav Forsling. Here's your run of the mill top 7, but I mean, hey, you know what? Eighth best defenseman, 36th on the list. Can't be too upset about that, especially, you know what? At least some of us know what we're talking about, right, Jacob?
Yeah, exactly. And so he did finish. Miro Heiskanen was the 9th defenseman at 41, and Dahlin was the 10th at 42. So ahead of those guys as well. So
hey, that's still not bad for those guys, especially for Miro Heiskanen. Yeah, that's not bad. You'll definitely take that if you're a big fan of Jaccob Slavin and just like what he's done for the Hurricanes. Like I said, you're talking about a guy who's had 10 penalty minutes or less every season. Yeah, like he did have some huge years points wise, but yeah, he's not someone who's going to rack up a lot of points. But you look at what's the best thing you want for a defenseman, and that is being available, and he is available. He's like PK1. He did score 2 shorthanded goals last year, so that should have meant to something at least, because you don't really see that very much happening. But it's kind of surprising how the fact that you look at a guy like what he's done, always being available, always shutting down the best guys in the league. I mean, there is a run. I still think it's active where if Jaccob Slavin's on the ice, Connor McDavid has not scored against the Hurricanes. So
wow,
yeah. If Slavin and McDavid are on the ice at the same time, McDavid has not scored against Slavin, at least 5-on-5. So, I mean,
that's very interesting. I mean, he's one of the best. I think Jaccob Slavin, Alexander Barkov, and Nico Hischier are the 3 best defensive presences in the league.
Yeah, bar none. I mean, and like I said, it's just crazy how you look at some like a lot of these other guys who play defense, and you're kind of like, oh, this guy's really great, this guy's really great. And you're like, oh, what about Jaccob Slavin? Yeah, he's good. He did put up offensive numbers, but he's good. And once you look at the underlying numbers, like I said, he's someone who's always available on the defense, always available on special teams too. And like you said, he's a leader. He's not the most vocal leader like a Jordan Martinook and Sebastian Aho, but he's definitely someone who leads by example and who potentially could be a captain at some point. I know a lot of people want Sebastian Aho, but Jaccob Slavin wouldn't be a bad one either. And also doesn't hurt when you just sign an 8-year extension at $6.4 million that kicks in next year. So I mean,
that's one of the best contracts in the league.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on the when you saw that number come across? You're like, wait, he's getting paid how much?
I was like, there's no way, because I covered the Ottawa Senators, and Jake Sanderson just signed 8 years, $8.05 million. Not just, but that's his contract, and like. I would take Slavin over Sanderson at this point in their careers, and probably for most of the next, I'll say 5 years, and then move after that. Probably I'll take Sanderson, but like Sanderson's a little bit better offensively, even though it was only his sophomore season last year. Sanderson's a bit better offensively, but he doesn't come anywhere close to Slavin defensively, and Sanderson is very good defensively. He's just nowhere close to Slavin.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, I do like Sanderson. Like you say, 2nd year in the league, I do like Sanderson as well. And yeah, just you got to give him more time. And like, let's be honest too, you give him a lot of props for what he can do with the Ottawa Senators for how you guys have been the last couple of years. I try to give him as much runway as possible. Be like, hey, you know what? We'll see what happens. And I had high hopes for you guys last year. I did have you guys finish in the wild card spot, so maybe.
Yeah, maybe someday.
Someday we'll know what the playoffs are like, but no, I do like Sanderson. I agree. I think his offensive game is really good. Yeah, defensively, like it's like Slavin Tays at this point. Like, who do you like take over who at this point? I'm like, who as your top like defenseman in the league? Like, if you had to pick one of the two, or like, could you make a case for both being one and the other one too?
I don't think that there is a case, and I'm taking Slavin in that spot. And it's not just because I'm on a Hurricanes podcast. I feel like I've been glazing the Hurricanes a lot, but it's not because I'm on a Hurricanes podcast. It's because I genuinely like all of these assets. But the thing about Devon Toews, he is a fantastic defenseman, no doubt about it, and he's great defensively. He plays with Cale Makar. He doesn't have to be outstanding defensively. Jaccob Slavin is playing with a 39, 40-year-old Brent Burns. Like, Brent Burns is still good.
Yeah, but I mean,
he's not Cale Makar.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the who's who of names that have been with Jaccob Slavin. You're talking like, Brett Pesce when they both came into the league for a good while, especially during the dark ages of the Hurricanes. We don't talk about that. I mean, even you had Tony DeAngelo for a season, also played with Jaccob Slavin. You saw what the season he had. Yeah, like you said, the last 2 seasons with Brent Burns. I mean, take a 38-39 Brent Burns and make him look really good. I mean, he's still good, but you make him like, okay, he doesn't play defense very much, and there you go.
Yeah, and I think the best defensive presence, Brett Pesce now is the best defenseman he played with. But at the time that Jaccob Slavin played with them, I think the best defenseman that he's had on his the other side of his pair. Do you know who I'm going to say?
Dougie Hamilton. Yep, I just thought of it. I'm like, I forgot a name.
I was going to say Ron Hainsey.
Ooh, okay.
I
forgot about Dougie Hamilton, but Ron Hainsey. Interesting choice.
I think Ron Hainsey is the best defensive presence that.
Defensive presence, yes. Yeah, defensive presence, yes, for sure. Offensively, I don't know. Dougie, Brent, I don't know. Gosh,
but they're all the offensive-minded guys. They're not great at the defense, and so Slavin has always had to be that.
Yeah, him and Ron Hainsey. I forgot about how shut down that line was with those two together. My goodness, if only Ron Hainsey was like 15 years younger.
Yeah.
Maybe, but I mean, we can go on about Jaccob Slavin for the next 5 hours of how good he is. But we both know he's top 10. It's just whatever reason, like Sebastian Aho wasn't top 10 for centers, and I wrote an article about it saying okay, you can look at Jack Hughes. Problem is Jack Hughes has never eclipsed 40% on the faceoffs. Aho has never been under 45%. In his career. Yeah. And I understand, okay, well, he had a bunch of points last year in Jack Hughes. Okay, well, so did Sebastian Aho. Yeah, he might have played more games, but he was 1 point shy of 90. And he had the same amount of points as Elias Pettersson, but he didn't fall off a cliff like Pettersson did for good stretches of the year. So it's just, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, I know a lot of people are going to roll their eyes at it, but do you still think there's that kind of it's Carolina? Yeah. Who really cares at this point?
That's never going to go away.
Yeah, I feel like it's that stigma of it's Carolina. Like no one really cares. Like they could have 5 superstars and they'd be like, they don't got superstars in that team, and you're like, Sebastian Aho.
Well, we were talking about it in our general chat in the Hockey Writers Slack. Frank Vetrano scored 37 goals last year. Raise your hand if you knew that. And it's because they're a small market. Right? Well, yeah.
I had him. I picked him up. I picked him as a free agent on my fantasy hockey team. Thank you very much.
Yeah, really though. But Anaheim's a small market team. They shouldn't be. They're right outside LA, but they are because they're overshadowed by LA. And Carolina is kind of overshadowed by some of the surrounding teams, with all the recent success Florida and Tampa have had. Yeah. And just moving up north a bit, there's a couple teams up there that did really well.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy when you look at the Hurricanes, who made 6 straight playoff appearances, 6 straight first round. They passed. I saw someone be like, when are we going to start making fun of the Maple Leafs and start making fun of the Hurricanes? When the Maple Leafs actually make it past the first round more than once in 2 decades, maybe, and actually know what an Eastern Conference final looks like. I'm not understanding the correlation of people want to dump on the Hurricanes. It's they've hit a hump. The Blackhawks hit a hump. The Avalanche kept hitting that hump for how many seasons until they finally broke out too. Alexander Ovechkin, he was perpetually always getting knocked out in the second round. So it's just, it takes time. It's just one of the things where it happens. But I don't know. Like you said, it's crazy when you talk about all these teams. Then it's you mentioned Carolina. It's kind of oh well, it's the Hurricanes. It's not that big of a deal. But it's how does this team consistently get overlooked for all the stuff they've done?
Yeah. Well, at one point, it was spanning from 2009 to 2023, the Carolina Hurricanes lost 12 straight conference final games.
Yeah, I knew that was coming at some point. I'm like, well, at least we made it there.
Yeah, and so I do understand. I mean, it's never going to be tiring to make fun of the Leafs in the first round, but I do get it. At some point, you have to look at it and say, the Hurricanes really, yes, they've had a lot of success in the first 2 rounds. It's been fantastic. But that was 12 straight losses. That was 3 sweeps in a row.
Yeah. The last one definitely hurt because it's kind of like every game was decided by one goal, quadruple overtime in game one. I'm really glad I wasn't writing at that point because I don't know how I actually stayed up and watched that entire game. It's like 2:30 in the morning. I'm like, I'm going to bed.
And for the record, I agree with Rod Brindamore. That was not a sweep. It didn't count.
Thank you.
It was 4 straight losses, but it wasn't a sweep.
That was probably the closest sweep I've ever seen for the fact that you lose by that. But Matthew Tkachuk, if he wasn't a Florida Panther in that series, it completely different. He scored 3 of the game-winning goals. I'm like, no, just stop. Just stop. Like, why? But I don't know. Hopefully someday the Hurricanes get more recognition where you see guys actually in the top 10. Maybe some guys are getting Norris nominations, some Selkies, some actual, Sebastian Aho becomes a superstar where they're like, oh, he's a star, but he's not there yet because the depth. It's always I always hear that argument of, well, Sebastian Aho is really good, but he's got depth behind him.
Yeah, it's they just have such a deep team, and while they do have their holes, it's insane.
This year, it's definitely going to be interesting for it being a transition year for the Hurricanes. So this will be the last thing I'll ask you before we head out. You look at the Hurricanes, you saw the turnover with, Pesce, and you also lose Brady Shea. I mean, that contract, just like Trocheck, we ain't matching that 7x7, especially at that age. But Timo Teravainen goes back to Chicago. Steph Nason goes back to New Jersey. Good for him because he definitely deserved that pay raise. Goaltending is going to be very interesting with Frederick Anderson coming back from missing 40 games last year. Pyotr Chekhov I think, should be the 1A coming up for the Hurricanes, especially since Anderson's in the last year of his deal coming up. What are your thoughts on the Hurricanes going into it could be a transition year? Do you see them still making the playoffs, and how do you think they are going to be for the 24-25 season?
I think they absolutely do make the playoffs. I don't love the offseason by Eric Tulsky. I would have liked to see the cap used in a bit of a different way. Just keep one of the guys that they lost. It doesn't really matter which one. They lost a lot of key pieces. I do like what they did in the offseason. Like, I like how he rebounded from that. And I'm sure that a lot of those contracts he would have regretted. I think keeping Brett Pesce around at his contract would have been fine. But also in an episode of the Hockey Writers Roundtable, I said that Sean Walker was my favorite signing. Sean Walker and Chandler Stevenson were my 2 favorite signings in free agency. So I think they got a great deal on him. He's going to work really well with Dmitry Orlov. I'd like bringing back Ghost to play with Jalen Chatfield.
Oh yeah, they played really well together when they got him from Arizona. Well, formerly Arizona, for like a 6th round pick. And honestly, again, those guys back at a combined 6.2, not bad, honestly, if you really consider it for the AAV compared to like Brady Shea was a 7 by himself. So. Yeah, I don't know, because I think I read something where it was like if you added Chatfield's extension with Walker and Gostisbehere, you're looking at like, I think it was like just shy of $10 million for the 3 of them, and you had Pesce and Shago for 12.5. So the cap does work. I really do like Sean Walker though. 5 years, I'm excited to see that. And then even with Orlov and Burns' contract coming off the Bucks, you still got 4 of your 6 defensemen locked up for at least 2 more seasons after this year in Ghost, Chatfield, Walker, and Slavin. Not a bad grouping, especially when you look at free agency next season. There are going to be a lot of interesting names. They're going to be unrestricted free agents, and I'm kind of curious to see how maybe this is a season where the Hurricanes, like you said, are making the big moves this year because maybe they're looking towards next offseason with the cap potentially going up, more big names becoming free agents. The Hurricanes are known as a splash team in the offseason, so maybe that's we're going to transition and get ready for next season with a lot more money coming off the books, especially with Anderson too. Anderson's contract comes off the books, so there's a lot of money. There's going to be a lot of money available.
And Orlov and Burns are off the book, and you have Nikishin and Morrow who are going to be ready for the NHL at that point. Like you can have a lot of money to play with, and at that point, like, are you going to call up Jackson Blake? Are you going to have Bradley Nadeau in the top 6? Are you there's going to be a lot of money to play around with.
Oh, 100%. Felix Unger-Storm, see how he does too. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of – it'll be very interesting to see what the Hurricanes do next season for sure. But that will wrap up this edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Thank you for making Locked On Hurricanes your first listen of the day. Now go check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NHL in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And Jacob, thank you so much for taking the time to join me tonight. I know it's a little bit longer than we thought, but honestly, great discussion talking about the top 20 list, talking about Jaccob Slavin, talking about other defensemen as well, and all that. So I do appreciate you taking the time and just coming on and talk hockey, especially when it comes to the Carolina Hurricanes. So yeah, big thank you.
I appreciate the invite. I'm always happy to come on and talk, and I'm good at talking, so I do it a lot.
I same here as well. Trust me, I completely understand that. I know I'll definitely have to get you on during the season. We get closer to some Hurricanes, Senators type stuff as well.
Yes.
But before we do let you go, where can people find you? And of course, your amazing writing at the Hockey Writers.
Yeah, so my stuff is on thehockeywriters.com, mostly covering the Senators. I do the draft content as well. I recently got credentialed for the Halifax Mooseheads of the QMJHL.
Way to go. Let's go.
Thank you. So I'm excited to get my feet wet in that, get some Mooseheads content out there, as well as CHL draft content. That's something I'm going to be focusing on a lot moving forward, as well as the Senators Roundtable. That you can find that podcast on YouTube and wherever you find your podcasts. So yeah, thanks for having me, Zach. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And also social media, it's Jacob Billing T10 if you want to go check him out. High quality follow. I definitely recommend following him. Even if you're not a Senators fan, still someone to definitely keep an eye on for a lot of great stuff. So make sure to keep an eye on that. Now, if you want to follow me, I'm at OneShoeZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. There is a link tree in my bio on my personal account where you can find all of my rating at the Hockey Writers, of course, with anything for the Carolina Hurricanes, and then also dipping into Chicago Wolves content this upcoming season. There's a lot of weekly stuff, not game by games, but just kind of keep up with the Hurricanes AHL affiliate. So make sure to go check that out. There's also links to my other podcast, The Searchcast, where you can watch and listen to that show. And then for this podcast, there is links to where to listen on all podcast platforms. Make sure to leave a 5-star rating and review, so I might just bring it on the show. And if you're on the YouTube side of things, let me know in the comments below. Do you think Jaccob Slavin is a top 10 defenseman? And give me your reason why he should be a top 10 defenseman in the NHL. Make sure to subscribe. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss the show. Hit the thumbs up button to let me know that you liked the episode as well. Make sure to share it with all their Caniacs so they become everydayers just like you. Because we are over 940 subscribers. And if we get to 1,000, I might just do something special for you guys. But I hope everyone enjoyed the Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Everyone enjoys their Friday and their Labor Day weekend. So make sure to go have some fun, guys. Have some hot dogs, beers responsibly, and just have some fun. Because why not? Why not? I don't know about you guys in Canada, but I know in the States it's Labor Day. We're going to have a nice little 4-day weekend. But hope everyone enjoys it. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.